I'd like to start with the administrative item of announcing that we had a an executive session yesterday to cover matters that were deemed sensitive from a public safety perspective. And with that, we can move to our next item, which is public comment. As always, we have 2 rounds of public comment. For those who would like to address items that are specifically on the agenda for today, you can speak now. At the tail end, we have another round that can be for matters that are more broadly associated with juvenile detention. So if anyone would like to address the board, please do so now. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less and provide your name and address to start.
Colleen Kennedy, 8723 Westchester Pike in Upper Darby. I'll make this brief as possible in case this doesn't qualify as an agenda item, but a vote was taken at the last meeting without public comment before that agenda item was voted upon, so I hope that you fix that today. Thank you.
Any other public comments? All right. The next item is an approval of the October minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments on the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. All right. The next item is the monthly detained youth report from the Juvenile Court and Probation Services. Is there someone who will be covering that?
I know
Kirsten's there?
Kirsten is sick.
Kirsten's-
So Danielle was going to be reaching out to David. I don't know if she did leave.
David, are you able to cover?
Yeah, I don't have the stats. I didn't receive anything as of yet.
Okay. Well, I guess we won't have a report for this month,
Yeah.
but not sure what else we can do about
I'm
that.
online.
Oh, there's
Oh, Danielle, there you are. I'm sorry. Are you prepared to provide the report? Danielle?
I'm sorry, I was not planning to attend myself because I'm a little bit under the weather, but Kirsten had an emergency that took her out quickly. So today, as of this afternoon, we have 2 juveniles in detention, both at Bucks County. And then for our direct files, we have 4 currently in detention, 3 at Abraxas, and 1 temporarily in Philadelphia.
Are there questions from the board? Okay, hearing none, we can move on to the Juvenile Justice Services report from our director, Mr. Rosari.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Hope you feel better.
Okay, so good evening. We're here today. As we know, we were able to contract Mr. Reed and Spiesel Architectural Group around developing a dual-purpose design that not only supports the services of detention, but supports the services of prevention, reentry, and rehabilitation. To remind folks, Mr. Reed has been is able to look at those options really based off of 2 lanes, right? Can we renovate the current space, or can we renovate the current space with additions? I was glad to hear that last month we approved the concept map that he developed along with our design subcommittee, which essentially was spatial requirements that we have all asked and recommended to be considered in the new potential center. And again, we made sure we prioritize everything related to licensing, so that's the educational space, the recreation, dining, housing, health and mental wellness, all in a secure setting, and being able to provide those services in a non-secure setting as well, really delivering the message that, you don't have to be arrested here in the county in order to receive these services. We're here today because we've asked Mr. Reed to apply that concept map to what the actual site and really be able to develop what that visual looks like. Throughout that process, we've discovered that one of the options that we've asked Mr. Reed to develop for us is highly unlikely. Mr. Reed is here today, and we're going to ask him to walk through some of those complications. But for me, I would love to start more on a positive note and talk about what we were able to accomplish with option 2. If you all look at the screen before you, and we'll zoom in certain areas. So again, when we talk about goals and objectives of this project, we talked about the dual purpose functionality and making sure we can provide somewhere that's safe and secure for young people who are highest risk and need for detention. But there are other objectives or other goals that we've asked Mr. Reed to accomplish within his building layout. And I'll run through about 7 or 8 of them. So first of all, we wanted this design to be less intimidating for youth, for families, and for other visitors. We're able to do so by, number one, eliminating that initial fence. In the current site, it's currently fenced, and we want our design not to look like that at all. And also, we wanted to make sure we had an official welcoming lobby for folks to give this an official government feel, to give an official center feel. We're able to do so with this design as well. Kirsch, if you can zoom in a bit to where the lobby is. I believe it's pink. A bit down. Again, so you'll see 3 different entrances up. Yeah, where the first arrow is. I apologize. That's the middle arrow. There we go, right? So you'll have an official lobby in which families can walk into before they walk into the secure facility. Another goal of ours was really protecting youth confidentiality. We wanted to make sure that when a young person is admitted to detention, that their confidentiality is protected. We've asked them to do so by, number one, building an enclosed sally port. Kirsch, if you can zoom down a bit in just terms of where the garage is, right? Initially, when a young person at our current center is taken into custody, it's kind of an open air space, which is hence the need of a fence. Or if a young person tried to escape, he would be able to do so easily. We wanted to be able to provide that enclosed sally port, not only to protect the confidentiality of young people, but also we want to make sure that our officers that are escorting young people in there, there isn't a flight risk and they're safe as well. Our next priority was, and again, I'll backtrack, even in terms of confidentiality, when we talk about a dual purpose, making sure that there's sight and sound separation for young people who are in detention as opposed to young people who are on the community support side receiving services proactively. We asked Mr. Reed to make sure that, a young person who's, at the center isn't looking out and says, I see Kevin Madden, he's in detention, he's out in the yard, things of that nature. We want to protect their confidentiality. We believe this design allows us to do so. For our next priority, we really wanted to prioritize family engagement. One of the first, if you can go, Kirsch, up a bit to that middle arrow, one of the first spaces that a family is going to see right there as they walk into the secure side, and that's the blue line in where the building becomes completely secure. If you look to my left, your right possibly, there's a family support center. Again, we wanted to have an official family visitation center to encourage families to come down and have a safe space to visit their young people. And you'll see on both sides of the secure and non-secure, there's an opportunity for young people, for families to be engaged, particularly in this green zone here. We'll be able to provide parent support groups, family counseling, things of that nature. We thought all that was great. We asked Bob to prioritize mental wellness, right? So on the secure side throughout the building, you'll see up to 8 spaces where, when a young person is going through a crisis situation, they have opportunity to separate themselves from other, right, voluntarily. We looked, Georgetown University, we worked with Sacramento County, and they had these sensory de-escalation spaces, right? And when they implemented these specific spaces within their center, the likelihood that a young person would have to be physically restrained, the likelihood that a young person and another young person get into a physical altercation drastically dropped. So we wanted to include that in our center throughout. And you'll also see on both sides of potential design, provider space for mental health services. We really want providers to be in this space to be able to provide the mental health services and different initiatives, even crisis management within the building. Another common theme we've asked for Mr. Reed throughout the building, multiple program space. We know the opportunity to address the idle time, prioritizing reentry and programming from day one. We need the space to do so. So you'll see that throughout the building, particularly on the secure side as well as the non-secure. We've asked Bob to really prioritize staff wellness, right? We know that our nucleus of the building is going to be well-paid, valued, empowered staff, right? Which is why we developed, if you can go down a bit, Kirshner, into the orange zone, you'll have an official kind of administrative wing where staff have their own space. If staff is going through something themselves, they're able to step outside, get a breather, things of that nature. We're able, again, to provide more of a organizational kind of hierarchy and having this official space outside of our secure center. Another thing we've asked for Mr. Reed is make sure we're prioritizing partnerships. So you'll see on both sides between meeting and workspaces for probation, attorneys, providers, interns, volunteers. We really want this center to be inclusive to the community, and folks can come in and help. We're all listening together, helping young people who are going through some tough times. I know I was able to provide you all, particularly our board, with a copy of what the design looks like. Kirsch, if you can zoom out to it. Here to answer any questions if folks have any specifics about this design, this option. We have Mr. Reed here with us today, and we're asking him to talk through a bit of what the complications are, or even how doable is the first option of including everything that we've collectively said we want it in a center in its existing space. So first, I'll defer to you all to see if you have any questions, and if not, we'll allow Bob to run through option one.
Can you clarify how much of this is new building and how much of this is reuse?
Sure. Kirshner, if you could zoom in a bit. So you have, move down, so you have that purple line there, move up, please, right here. That purple line, which is right above, right below the lobby. Do you see the pink lobby?
Yeah.
So that is the existing space that is going to be renovated. You can kind of see
Everything below that line.
Everything below, I
It's existing.
apologize. Everything below that line already exists. The only remaining space, you can kind of see to the left of that, there is a corridor, and then there's kind of like an L shape of the building. Those are two residential pods that we are recommending in this option be demolished.
So in other words, the kind of blues and purples area is primarily, although not exclusively, existing space that would be renovated.
Correct. If you look at the ledger there, all the gray space is all existing space that's going to be renovated.
Oh, that's more helpful there.
Yep.
So Area 8 where the gymnasium is now?
Correct. That's our B wing where education and recreation is currently happening.
So, and how much is being demolished? How do we see what's being demolished?
Kirsch, if you can.
It won't show on this, it won't show on that.
Okay,
You can
so-
see sort of a very
Yeah.
vague
Go back.
ghost of it,
Yeah,
I
if you
think.
zoom out, Kirshner. So Councilwoman, if you see,
You can see the background.
Yeah, where,
Trees are
Yeah.
that area.
it's like an L shape of a building with a hallway connecting.
Under the trees, the new trees?
Kirsch, can you use your cruiser to kind
So
of highlight that?
right there.
Right around here is the existing,
Yep.
well, unlike a point above.
Okay, so does this mean, if we adopted this means that sharing the space for central booking is completely off the table?
Yeah,
Yes.
we didn't
Okay.
consider. But I think when you hear about Mr. Reed talk about the complications of the other side of the building, it's less likely that anything in terms of an office can happen on that side. And he'll be able to run through, I guess, from his professional perspective, what the complications are.
And do you have like a square footage, like how much it was, how much it's shrinking down to?
I'm sorry, the question was how
Like
far?
how big it was as an existing facility and how much we'd be using now?
I don't think it's really a shrinking down, because I think this, Yeah, its part will be demolished and replaced with new infrastructure
So
that's...
is that right? It's about equal?
Yeah, so so in terms of the secure side, the size that we're using overall is about the same, but that's a combination of demolition and additions to make that happen for functional reasons.
But I guess to ask Ms. Schaefer's question, I think what you're asking is the square footage of what's proposed here versus the square footage of what is there today. What's the
Right, yeah.
difference there?
So what we're showing in green and in orange is all addition to what was there previously. So we're approximately doubling the size of the facility if you take away the residential C and D wings.
Let me try it again. So as it is today, what's the square footage of what we have?
49,000 square feet,
And as is proposed there, what's the square footage?
approximately 85,000 square feet.
So essentially,
But that's secure and non-secure.
But that's secure and non-secure. That's not just replacing what's
And when
there.
you say 49,000, that includes the residential wing that's going to be demolished?
Correct.
Okay, so it is a significant increase in the square footage.
Yes, that's right.
in terms of design, it's essentially two centers attached to each other, like a duplex kind of design.
It's
So,
not
Mr.
showing.
Reed, do you want to go through option one a bit? Kirsch, if you could pull that up? You're good to sit here if you just talk about it, yeah.
Well, actually, if we could zoom out on option 2 real quick, just so that we have an idea. So then as was noted, the residential wings C and D are to the left of the green portion that you can see on the aerial below. So then in this scenario, those two residential wings would be demolished, and the green portion and the orange portion are additions that run fairly parallel to 352, but not quite. So then if we could go to option 1, please. So with option 1, we were looking at how do we work with the existing building to the greatest extent possible.
Yeah.
So if we could zoom out on that, please, Kirshner. So on this, it was a matter of how do we, and if we could zoom up, thank you, how could we use those two residential wings that have green in them as well to the left-hand side of the green portion of the plan. So as we were looking at using that for the non-secure side, because we no longer need it for residential, so then it was a matter of taking spaces that many of them are larger, some program spaces such as classrooms and multi-purpose spaces, and trying to work with the existing construction of those residential pods to include those uses. And what we found was the building is, not surprisingly, the building is just not designed for other uses besides residential pods for those two wings. So there are a number of small rooms that were used for detaining. And then we do, structurally, we have the ability to rip out all the walls within the space. But what we end up with is a single loaded corridor. So if you can see the tan that runs along the exterior wall, very inefficient in terms of how we would lay out a building. Generally, you have a corridor that runs down the middle of the building, so that same corridor can serve rooms on both sides. Also, the floor-to-floor height is very low. So if anyone's been in the building, when you walk down the main corridors, they're less than 7'6" high, which is where the ductwork runs. And then once you go into one of the rooms, then it would go up another foot. But what we find in trying to put larger spaces into this building, it doesn't even meet code because you have to have a minimum of 7'6" clear for ceiling height in a per code, let alone looking at, when you have larger rooms like a classroom and whatnot, 7'6" is just not feasible. You would look at trying to have a ceiling like the height of a room like we have here. So it's just not practical. And that was to run ductwork for 12 people in that space. If we're trying to put more people into those buildings because of the function of them, we would have even more ductwork and it would force our ceilings to go down even lower. And also, what we found is in C wing, which is the right-hand residential pod that we were suggesting be demolished, There is no heat or air conditioning in the building. It's been cut off totally because of functional problems in the past. So looking at the building, some code issues that we have, as well as looking at how plumbing runs through the building, which actually isn't even optimal for a corrections use. It would be a matter of ripping most of the building apart to try to make these functions fit in there, quote unquote, but they really would not function properly because of the limitations of the building.
So what I hear you saying is this option one is basically your professional attempt at fitting a round peg into a square hole.
Correct. And we would in no way recommend keeping those residential pods for different kinds of uses. They're just not, it's just not logical, from my opinion.
And group, for us, I think it's our attempt to express that, number one, and you know, as Bob moves forward with developing what a potential estimate of a price is, you know, we know we've contracted him to look at 2 different options. It was just our attempt to express that option one is highly unlikely to happen.
All right. I guess to start, if there are members of the design subcommittee who have questions or comments they want to add, considering they've been more tuned into this throughout.
I mean, I guess I could just say, and Reverend Turner, you can jump in as well, is that we looked exhaustively at options. I think both Bob and his team and Danielle have been very patient with us as we've gone through different scenarios, and you know, they basically guided us to the conclusion that he's expressing today, which is that working with the current building would just be impractical and probably a lot more expensive than folks are imagining it would be. I think intuitively, if you use what you've got, it's got to be cheaper, but it sounded like it would not. So, you know, given that, we thought, you know, why not have option 2 express all the aspirations that the board mentioned in prior meetings, to have, you know, robust programming as well as a safe space, welcoming in the community. So it's an embodiment not only of the physical reality of the building that we have, but of the, you know, aspirations that we have for the system, broadly speaking.
I mean, yeah, I would totally concur, and I think the other piece for me that really drove this all home was when I started looking at all the code issues and code violations that currently exist. You know, if you were to have L&I come through and walk through that space, they wouldn't approve it today. You know, again, it was fine under grandfather, but under today's codes, that's just not, just doesn't make any sense. So it really is better to raise it and then put something that gives you a better feel, better look, and is, for me, more representative of Delaware County and who we are and what we are trying to portray to help our young people. So, we were trying to fit that square peg into that round hole a lot, and it just wasn't going.
Thank you, Reverend. I guess I'll open it up to the broader board. Any further thoughts, questions?
Does this revised plan shift your timeline that we discussed last week in any way? Like more time to? No?
It all fits within the timeline. Actually, both options fit within the timeline. That's what Mr. Reed has expressed to me.
Can we talk through the use of the community space?
Sure.
And who's using it and how? I mean, it's a lot of space.
There's a lot, yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity for partnership, right? I think if you look about best evidence, best practices, we can partner with the courts, right, for evening, weekend reporting, alternative day programming, right, alternative schooling, things of that nature, all things that evidence shows that work more effectively than detention. We can partner with CYS and other community-based organizations to really develop preventive programming, right? Let's look at some key indicators of young people in Delaware County who are more likely to get involved in the system. Let's address them early on. I think the sky's the limit in terms of having open programming space that we can utilize Even if we look at a lot of studies around addressing out-of-school time, right? Young people who don't have much to do during those out-of-school time hours are a lot likely to come in contact with the system. So I think the sky's the limit. For the past 2 days, I've had the opportunity to sit in a conference for the Youth Corrections Leaders for Justice, and folks around the world, and our vice chair was there as well, who are doing this reform work. The new administrator for the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention talked about her goals from the nation, right, from the White House, and in terms of investing less in institution and investing more in programming. I think although spatial-wise and potentially even pricing-wise, this may be a shock to folks, I think this is a center that's going to outlast all of us. There is a change in this field. Every detention leader, including my staff member, Mr. Walker, who's done it for the past 20 years, talks about this field being a dying horse, right? This gives us an opportunity to still address some of the highest risk young people and protect themselves or protect others, which a lot of the data in this county shows that there's, again, and even we'll talk about nationally, and all my work in violence prevention, it's still true that only less than 2% of the population drive most of the crime, right? So it's less than 2% of young people are going to fit very high risk, all right? But it doesn't mean that other young people who may be low to moderate don't need the services to prevent them from getting to that point, and I think a center like this allows us to do so.
Is there space in that community side, the unsecured side, for our provider partners to, set up shop? Is there office space for them? And
Yep, we built in satellite space, we built in programming space throughout the buildings. We can, at some point, and I'm thinking into the future, but, we can shift contracts that, for folks to work out of the center, have satellite space within the center. I think all that is what we thought about in terms of, its use.
I just have a question. Is
Sure.
this still the plan of one pod opening first or initially and then continue?
We've asked Mr. Reed to start with the secure side in order to meet the demands of the county and our partners at first. If you remember his projected timeline, I believe maybe 6 to 8 months prior to the entire finish,
Sure.
We should be able to have the secure side.
Any other questions, comments?
I have a question.
Sure.
So it sounds like the uses for the secure side are pretty broad. Maybe, I guess my question really is, have there been discussions with CYS and other departments to see how exactly they would use this? Because I'm concerned about the county building this and then not having a specific uses mapped out and then kind of scrambling later to say, okay, what can we use the space for? Sort of putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah, I think with our partners, I've expressed my interest to continue to partner and be able to use this center in a proactive way. I think one positive is, unfortunately, the timeline that Mr. Reed has presented to us, there's a lot of time to figure out what exactly that looks like and how we operationalize that. Personally, just getting to know the folks at the table, I can't foresee any of our partners not wanting to use the space. And I think it's all about us being creative on how we're going to use it. So in terms of right now, Ms. Diaz, there isn't a concrete plan, but we've had conversations around the ideas.
And do those departments think that this is the best location for that type of programming?
I've never asked that question.
Okay.
Right. What I will say is, community centers, even reporting centers are really best built in a community, right? In specific community you're addressing. So you want, for instance, Upper Darby kids to be in Upper Darby. You want Chester kids to be in Chester. But again, I think having a centralized location where folks can get to, even talking to our council chair around, having to develop early on, understanding the idea of transportation, right? We have to be able to probably pick kids up at school and get them home safely. So all that stuff has to be considered. But I do know that, our partners probation have contracts with providers around transportation. So it's really probably just building off on some of those contracts.
For my part, I know that there is an urgency. There's a scarcity of beds statewide that we're all well aware of. We have youth who are absconding and cutting bracelets and things of that sort that, for their own safety and for the safety of the community, do need to be in some form of detention for some period of time. So we have that urgency, but, my view, and I think we've talked about this, and I've certainly expressed it, I want to make sure that we do this right. I don't want to see that we race to an opening and open something that this board would not feel aligns with our values and is doing right by the community and by the youth that entangle themselves. I think that what's laid before us as a draft, I think largely accomplishes what we've looked for. I think there is a natural tendency for those who think about Lima to be stuck within the mindset of what is currently there today. And I think what we're trying to show is that that's not what we're stuck within, that while parts of the building can be utilized in a way that's reflective of what we want, in order to really have the shift that I think is necessary, where previously everything was inward facing. There was not a sort of openness to community involvement and for other organizations to help. I think the building that's reflected here is really outside in. It allows for space to collaborate and to bring the community, to bring family, to bring other community members who want to see reform, to be a part of that conversation, be a part of it in action. So I think this is along the direction that we'd like. I also want to just briefly address the comment at the outset. I'm very mindful of any concerns around transparency. To state, as I said previously, last month's, what was brought forth was really more of what was the term that we used for it?
Well, a bubble diagram would work.
Say it again?
A programming diagram.
Programming diagram, right? So very preliminary. I think we advanced it with the sense that there was still plenty of steps to get public involvement. The report that you provided last month is posted on the website. So I do think that we're providing numerous opportunities for the public to express their opinions about what we have here, and there will continue to be. I don't think that we're bringing this forth today with a sense that we're going to approve a final design. We've talked previously about having meetings in other parts of the county where others may have access to a design that's not final but is close, is far enough along where it is useful to have input. I think we're kind of there. So I don't know, David, if you have thoughts around that, but I would welcome having other opportunities for community members to see this and to opine on it.
Yeah, I think collectively, if we're understanding that we're going to ask Mr. Reed to look into a pricing of option one, more than happy to schedule community meetings in specific communities during accessible hours to really talk this through and get the feedback. For me, it would be great with young people. I also like to remind folks that, we do have an initiative that's launching December 1st, bringing the Center for Children's Law and Policy down here, that is going to collect the perspective of young people who are criminally who have been affected by the criminal justice system. Right? We're going to get their perspective in terms of, what their experiences have been, specifically the Delco, what type of programming do they need, what type of program do they want, and we're able to take those recommendations as we, down the line, are going to look at what type of programs are going to be in this center. We're going to be able to incorporate that, and our partners are going to be able to incorporate it as well within their systems.
Yeah, I think we're tapping into national level experts within the space of youth justice as we advance this idea. We're really aiming to have something that is cutting edge and really is at the front edge of what an answer can look like as it relates to youth justice.
Yeah, so if I just, and I know that you just were at the conference, but, when I look at some of the national data about where the country, where the leadership in Washington is going, the timing of this is really kind of opportune, because if Washington is looking at how to change the model, and we are already ahead of the curve in changing that model, then there's probably opportunity for them to help fund some of the things that we're talking about and being very innovative in that regard. And so I know that the folks here in the county are very aggressive in going after federal dollars. And so I think that's a great opportunity to say, okay, here, we're putting this together. We're looking at this. What are we missing, right? Here's what we have. What are we missing from a national best practice standpoint? And we're moving forward with this, but we need support because, again, when you look at that and you look at, again, double the size, but yet more, it's more for community, so forth and so on, it sends all kinds of, like, why are you spending my money this way? But if we can get the other partners to be a part of this, I think that eases the burden of the county, but it also expands our opportunity to do even greater things. So I think, that what you just talked about would be a great path to go alongside of what, not to stop what we're doing, like don't wait for the check, just keep doing what we're doing, but have those conversations with other folks that are doing it and see if those dollars are going to be made available for juvenile. And I would say also with the state, also PCCD is looking at this very same thing as it relates to juvenile justice. There are dollars that are there that we as a county should and can go after, even in the shaping of this new model that we're talking about here. So.
And I think it's also an important reminder that this is all happening in parallel with efforts to find community-based approaches, right? So, the goal here is to have a smaller and smaller population of youth that do need to be detained because we have alternative, credible, strong alternative programs in community. But I think what, we've gone back to this repeatedly, but I think we all agree that there is going to be some small set of youth that, for their own security and for that of the community, do need to be in a secure setting for some period of time. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish here.
So I'm very pleased and intrigued by the notion of this looks more like a youth service center than a detention center with an array of services. I love that. And it looks like the services part is kind of bigger than the detention part, which is great. But I am having a little trouble getting my head around what those services, support services, would look like in this setting, in this location. Yeah. It would be really helpful for me, not today, but to get some examples, like from YAP or from from our other organizations, of how they would use this space and who they think would come, what families they could serve here, and how that would look.
Sure. Willing to sit down with you at any time and walk through some potential ideas. Again, it's very important, specifically when we get to the point where we're considering what services that we have young people at the table, right? Because they're gonna, we may not understand what a young person needs, right? We can say collectively we might need some educational support, might need a mentor, right? Might need some other, maybe some counseling, things of that nature, right? But we gotta have young people at the table who are gonna tell us what they need, right? And specific young people who are, reside in Delaware County. And I think there's an opportunity there to include all that, which is, which is going to ensure that not only will our support side be full, but it'll be effective.
I think that's a great idea.
Any other questions or comments?
I just wanted to thank Mr. Reed and his team. I think we're talking about two things at the same time. And I just want to be clear, a structure, we cannot discuss programming and sit with people and have their voice heard and have input without a structure. And so the structure and the construction and the contracting and the design and the execution is in the hands of the experts here. And so thank you. With the consideration of, in the future, what that looks like, the supports and the programming. And I think that's the two things that we are talking about. So I just thank you for giving the options, and it appears that you are considering all the things that we as a board collectively see in the future in the plan. But programming and services, well, it sounds to me, will be part of that secondary conversation once we have a structure and ductworks and ceilings and so forth are taken care of.
Yeah, it's my hope at some point as we discover models and programs that we can have them present, right? And we can collectively as a board decide, you know, what we want to invest in, and again, always considering, you know, the voice of young people.
Mr. Erzer, can you just also lean in a little bit on timing and next steps, particularly around kind of getting to a final design? So,
sure.
What happens with regard to other opportunities for community involvement, and you know, when do we sort of get into cost before we get something that we can actually approve or support for approval?
Sure.
That would go to county council.
After this meeting, Mr. Reed is going to start working on that estimation of pricing as it relates to option 2. On behalf of myself, going to really work on developing what some of those community meetings are to get community's input on this design. That gives Bob enough time to incorporate anything or any changes in which community would like to consider. You know, it's my goal at our December meeting possibly to be able to you know, express what that estimated cost is, right, and rip that Band-Aid off, unfortunately. And then at some point, you know, as it relates to Bob's timeline, hopefully sometime in February, we can have before our county council with your all approval and a kind of final product. That way, you know, we can get a yes or a no, or you know, go back to the drawing boards with some recommendations from council. That's kind of our hope. So again, you know, in December, a combination of Bob finalizing with the pricing, us having a series of maybe community meetings in the community to get their perspective as well, and sometime between January and February having that final ask, I think, from council is my hope.
Okay, so if we can, as we finalize plans for community events,
yep,
or gatherings, obviously we'll publish that on the website, yep, and we can push that through, yep, county council.
Yep. And again, our provider from Washington, D.C., our contract starts December 1st. And I believe within the first 3 months of the contract is when they're going to start, they're going to subcontract a community-based organization to start surveying young people within the county to get their perspective in terms of their wants and needs.
Great. And today or afterwards, members of the public who are here, we certainly welcome your input on where you'd like to see presentations. And I think you're all aware, but there's a public email address for this board that you can always also use.
You can reach out to me directly. I'm happy to meet with any and everybody who has ideas down at the office and be able to take your concerns as well.
Yeah, so the only other thing I would ask, and I know this is somewhere down the line, I know it's not a day-to-day type of thing, but most people are three-dimensional. So at some point, if you could create some kind of a rendering that speaks to the space, or you know, a drone walkthrough,
yep,
kind of a thing, that would be helpful, I think, for the community to really understand fully the length and breadth. Because even though this looks like a lot, it actually is a lot more.
Sure.
You know, than the little boxes that we're seeing right here. So.
Yeah. I think when we get to that point, it'll be extremely impactful to be able to show what it looks like and the feel of it. So we'll continue to work Mr. Reed on moving forward with that, but obviously we need approval in terms of a design and moving forward as a whole in the county. And I think Mr. Reed at that point will be able to provide a lot more visuals based off of his programming that he has.
Yeah, I mean, rightfully so. There should and will be a lot of scrutiny about what this design looks like, and we want that scrutiny.
Sure.
So, you know, to make it as accessible as possible for the public to understand what's intended here, I think is important.
Right.
All right, if nothing else on this.
Thank you.
We'll move on to any old business from the board. Any new business that would like to be addressed? Hearing none, we can move on to public comment. So if there are members of the public who would like to address the board, please do so. Limit your comments to 3 minutes or less, and provide your name and address to start.
Hello, Colleen Kennedy, 8723 Westchester Pike in Upper Darby. So I have a couple of notes. Just at the outset, because I wrote these notes, I just want to say thank you to Mr. Madden for some of the comments during this meeting about building more transparency. I have some thoughts on that. I'm really thrilled that this diagram that was printed out, that you didn't vote on it. I was really worried that that was going to be voted on as an official action. And so thank you for not doing that. I still just want to politely reiterate that when you take official action in a meeting, you have to have public comment before. And it's not a matter of me trying to make the work that you all are doing difficult. It's me trying to speak out from a place of experience from within communities in this county where really bad things have happened when those rules aren't followed. And they also are just the rules that we all have to follow. So I just wanted to note that the diagram that was presented at the last meeting, that presentation really should have come before public comment happened. And I know it feels silly because only a couple of us can actually make it to these meetings, but it's still the rules. That brings me to my next point, which I think Mr. Madden and others have talked about a little bit, which is that it's really difficult for people who are directly impacted by this issue to actually make it to these meetings in person on a Tuesday at 4:30. And so the more we can diversify not only the date and time of those meetings, but also have them all over the county, I think that would be amazing. I also want to suggest the idea of partnering with organizations that are led by people actually directly impacted, not just organizations that do this work, but again, organizations where they're led by people who have actually been in juvenile detention, and I can help you connect with a few. That's really where we're actually going to meet the mark on that. In addition, I think that you should be holding meetings in every single school district in the county, but prioritizing the communities that we know are going to be directly impacted by this, such as Upper Darby School District, Chester Upland, and more. The next thing I wanted to talk about really quickly is I still don't have a full amount of clarity about the number of beds that you proposed for this facility. And I just want to remind you all that earlier in this meeting, you talked about a total of 7 young people currently needing these services. My understanding, the lowest number that I've heard so far the past couple of meetings is 24. So that concerns me. And so I just really would like a future meeting for more clarity on what the rationale is for that, to have a higher number of beds than what we actually currently need if we're trying to move away from these types of solutions toward community-based solutions. Finally, I am really concerned because yes, we need to, if you are going to build a facility like this, even if it's, like Councilor Schaefer said, is more of a youth services-led center rather than a detention center. I'll wrap up. I have 2 more sentences. I apologize. We really need to have an understanding of the curriculum and the programming, and that needs to be led by the people who are going to end up being here. And we also don't even have a license yet. So I just feel like we're sort of putting the cart before the horse. It's impossible at meetings to read these little printed out sheets and be able to make any kind of substantive comment. So I just think if you all would really like to work together with activists and community members, we are willing to be your partners and bring in folks who will ultimately be in service with these services in the future. So please talk to us and try and work together with us. Thank you.
Hi, Mary Austin, 1036 First Avenue Media. I'm glad to hear we're considering some options. I also, like Colleen, wasn't clear on why we're having such a large facility without that need, that it encourages law enforcement in the county to fill these beds and make use of the money. I also don't know if we've discussed or if there's even been a thought to how we're naming the facility. I haven't heard that in the conversations, but I think if we're thinking about how to reimagine, that we should reimagine the name as well. Thank you.
Peace, everybody. Andre Sims, 708 Felton Avenue, Sharon Hill, PA. I want to first begin with just pointing something out. When we got to the detained youth report, I was on my way here, listening to it in the car. That was the quickest, item on this agenda. That was the quickest section in this entire meeting. And it really disturbs my spirit that we sit here saying that we care for young people, that we're doing this to, protect young people when we're just counting them and moving on during this detained youth report. We're saying numbers and where they're at, but we are not numbers. We are human beings, we're lives. And I think it's important, if we're going to work towards real solutions, that we sit down and really consult with young people, the people who these problems impact the most. How many people on this board have done time? My show of hands. How many know what it feels like to be in Lima? There are people out here who can answer these questions and can give you these perspectives, but without bringing them to the table, without a young person sitting right there where that empty mic is and having the agency to, voice their experiences and use their power, we're never going to come to real solutions that are going to be actually impactful. We're going to continue to, perpetuate this cycle. And so I'll leave you with this. The amount of money, energy, and attention that we spend on building this new facility, if we took that and invested that into the actual livelihoods of our young people, education, resources, things of that nature, we would not need this facility in the first place. And that is a fact. Statistics show that if you invest in education, you're going to get a safer community. So thank you for your time.
Andre, real quick, we had the opportunity, and Mr. Madden speaks about executive session. We had an opportunity for over an hour yesterday to talk about these young people specifically. We have to protect the confidentiality of these young people, so we can't get in much detail. But just for me to you, we have discussed in detail for about an hour yesterday these young people. As a collective, as a board, we talked about potential alternatives for them and things of that nature. So I want to let you know that is happening. It's not happening in a public setting.
All right. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public?
Good evening. Ingrid Bird, 410 Walnut Hill Lane, victim advocate. Sitting here, and on more than one occasion, it was brought up the number of juveniles, and the number seems really low. I just want to clarify that the numbers that are being addressed are the numbers that are currently in beds that we have been able to locate. It does not represent the number of juveniles that are in need of beds. So it's a matter of what's available as opposed to what's needed. And I don't know what that number is, but I think that number 7 is a very misleading number. Thank you.
Are we permitted to say something at this point?
Yeah, are there any other public comments? And then we can move to board member comment. But if you're also welcome to.
Thanks. I would just, for the board's, I guess, when they're processing, kind of when we're all moving forward in programming, I hear a lot of great people bringing up great points about bringing people to the team. Ingrid and her colleagues, along with those other victim advocates in the field, need to be brought to the table too. I keep hearing about young people. While that's why we're all here, and that's why we're here serving, to make this a better place to treat the individuals who have been detained as the young people that they are. We are also not talking about those victims that have been victimized and forever will have to deal with the violence that they've endured, and their families. So Ingrid and her team and those others that are also experts within the victim advocacy field, they should be brought to the table as well. And then for the individual who brought up about the name change, I think that's something that's been dear to my heart too, that I brought up to the board. And I know that the design team has considered that as a name change.
Yeah, so we discussed it originally. I think collectively we all know we need to call it something different. The recommendation from the design team is part of our youth survey is asked the young people, or getting community perspective in terms of what the new center should be called, which is why we haven't chosen a name yet.
Pastor Harrison, 919 Ellsmere Place, Chester, Pennsylvania. Just one brief comment. Thank you for not forgetting about the parents. I'm listening to people say that, in some of the past meetings, bad families or bad parents. What about the good parents that are crying out for help? The good parents that have been here repetitively asking for support. So I do believe we want to hear from our young people. We mentioned that before, having them at the table. But you got to hear from the victims that are dealing with the young people that need placement. Thank you.
Any other public comments? If not, we'll move to board member comments. Anything else for today? I think just one maybe comment that was, or question that was raised that I think is worth a little bit of discussion on is just with regard to size. David, if you perhaps want to give a few remarks on that.
Sure.
And one in particular is the need to sort of have two separate wings that,
So collectively, we landed at 24, right? And there's a plethora of ways in how we landed there. Number one, working with our partners, even Columbus Justice Lab, the 2/3 reduction was standard amongst most folks who are trying to reduce their population. Working with our current criminal justice partners, I've asked, prior to COVID, what year most reflects their belief in terms of the need. A lot of times folks landed on the year of 2018. If you look at their daily average census, it was 24. For me, my focus was on highest risk young people. I've worked collectively with our new prison warden to collect the last 5 years of data just in terms of a young person who had committed a very serious crime here in Delaware County and previously resided at George W. Hill would now be part of my census. And at that point, we landed at about 24 years as well. So we wanted to have space to be able to address that. One thing I will say is, as I watch the numbers very closely, I would say by the end of October every year, the county has historically averaged around 20 young people who have committed a very serious offense. Those numbers are trending very low. Year to date, we've only had 8, which is very positive, and kudos to our folks on the ground who are doing a lot of work to prevent that. And I think, collectively, we looked at those numbers, and that's how we decided that 24. And again, it's my goal to make sure that those 24 beds are empty. But from a strong public safety background, we want to fit some of the need if possible.
And I think there's also just the practical matter of the fact that the existing wings are already built to hold, it's 12 per wing?
By the current center has 13, but by state requirement, it can't have more than 12 within a residential. So we want to be able to provide the same amount of space, both male and female, and also you want to have space for separation. Again, we've built that in with, 8 different spaces for a young person to kind of de-escalate themselves. But if, there's technical issues. If we got co-defendants that can't be in the same wing, things of that nature. So we want to have some space for separation.
All right. I have nothing further for today. I'm not sure if any other comments from board members. If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all.